Good afternoon, everyone. Hello. All right. Well, thank you for the opportunity, Kyle, to join everybody here today, but have a little time on the agenda to provide some MnDOT updates and have the honor of kicking off our keynote speaker for the afternoon. Kyle, thank you for your leadership to CTS and in this space, and thanks to the whole CTS team and University of Minnesota for hosting a great conference again this year. It's really my pleasure to be here with this great community of researchers. So academia, our practitioners, and government partners whose work is shaping the future of transportation. And every year I look forward to this event, and this year is no exception. What a great theme we have this year of unpacking freight. And in fact, over the last year, all the deeper dive into freight. So I was just telling Kyle last week at a meeting we were at together, I've learned so much more about freight over the last year because of CTS taking this deeper dive and learning more about the challenges, the opportunities. Loved the panel discussion this morning too. So thank you, Allison and Leah and Robin for that discussion. That was great. But today is for sharing these discoveries, learning about innovations, prompting new ideas, and appreciating the wealth of knowledge and ability that is shared by everyone in this room. So our mission at MnDOT is to connect and serve all people through a safe, equitable, and sustainable transportation system. And research is an important component of that. It enables MnDOT to continuously improve how we preserve and improve and design our infrastructure, how we operate the system, and how we respond to problems and issues as they arise. Our research at MnDOT spans every aspect of transportation, from materials and construction to maintenance of roads and bridges, traffic safety, providing multimodal options, and stewardship of the environment, and sustainability and equity in policy and planning. We're proud to be working on over 140 active research projects resulting in real-world impacts for Minnesotans and the future of our transportation system. And some of the projects that are being shared here today, since I've got a little moment here to put a spotlight on those, is mitigating community harms of dense highway infrastructure or spaghetti junctions, advancing equity in capital investment decision-making, and development of non-proprietary ultra-high performance concrete pre-stressed bridge girders. So thank you to the dozens of researchers and nearly 800 technical advisory panel members who make this work possible. We greatly appreciate our academic partners here at the University of Minnesota, and our long-standing relationship with the U of M and CTS is a great example of what we can achieve together. Let me touch on one project: improving turf grass seed mixture recommendations for roadsides in northern United States, which was honored this year with the CTS Research Partnership Award. And we know the importance of establishing vegetations along our roadsides. Prevents erosion, keeps contaminants from reaching ground and surface water, and of course has an aesthetic value. But in Minnesota, establishing persistent plant growth can be challenging because of weather extremes and damage from snow and ice operations and exposure to de-icing salt. So for nearly a decade, U of M researchers worked with MnDOT and other university partners in a multi-phase study to identify roadside turf grass options for northern climates. And the team developed recommendations for turf grass seed mixtures based on location and soil quality, and they established an annual process by which MnDOT, our industry partners, and our stakeholders, and those in Minnesota and other states too, can update turf grass seed and sod mixture recommendations and assure that top-performing grasses are used and resulting in economic and environmental benefits. So following Kyle's remarks, we can give that project a hand. Let's do that. Thank you for that. All right, and so following Kyle's remarks this morning, we are super excited about celebrating 40 years of CTS's work improving our transportation system throughout 2026. And the center's contribution to workforce, research, knowledge building, technology transfer, and the education continuation is making a difference in Minnesota and beyond. CTS's focus for this next year on implementing transportation research is something that MnDOT is committed to as well. In fact, innovation and implementation is part of our 6 core values that guide our research. Implementing research helps MnDOT build collective knowledge, proficiencies, and best practices, and it supports continuous improvement when incorporated with MnDOT's procedures, specifications, standards, and work methods. And a recent implementation project, which explored innovative methods and materials for the crucial yet challenging job of repairing in-water bridge supports, is a great example of putting research into practice. And so this project investigated options for strengthening existing bridge piling that wouldn't require rerouting water or disrupting traffic. And so MnDOT's researchers studied other states' experience and then tested 2 vendors' systems that used fiberglass reinforced plastic jackets and steel reinforced grout, both of which provided viable results. And now engineers across the state have an option for making these repairs with minimal traffic disruption and minimal environmental impacts. Also at MnDOT, I wanted to mention, we had an event last week that is really a point of pride for me. Our Office of Research and Innovation, led by Katie Walker, had an event in which we provided awards for innovations at MnDOT. And so we had all employees the ability to submit innovations that they've been working on and successes and what they've learned with those, and we provided awards in different categories. It was great to just pause in our daily work for a moment to reflect on good work that's happened in the innovation space and give recognition to it and hear about that across the department. I will admit I certainly learned a lot more about what we're doing in some of these areas just by understanding what was nominated for these awards, and it was great. It's important to take time out to make sure we are understanding research and innovations that are going on and sharing that knowledge with one another and celebrating it. So thank you for all you're doing out there in this space, all of you. Thank you for taking the time today to participate in the CTS Research Conference and be here, and I hope you'll come away with insights we can take back to our own work and apply to the challenges we face as we look for new and better ways to advance transportation in Minnesota. So now it is my honor to introduce our afternoon keynote speaker, Robert Hampshire, the Executive Director for the university's newly established Research Development Office. So Dr. Hampshire recently joined the U of M from the Gerald R. Ford School of Public Policy at the University of Michigan. His time at Michigan bookended 4 years as Assistant Secretary for Research and Technology at the U.S. Department of Transportation, where he also served as the Chief Science Officer, becoming the first to fill that role in over 40 years. And in this role, he led USDOT's $2 billion research and technology portfolio and agenda across all modes of transportation. I'm looking forward to hearing from Dr. Hampshire, his discussion today about how the nexus of research, innovation, and implementation in academia, agencies, and private sector can transform transportation in all sectors, really. I first got to know Robert from our interactions at TRB, and then through a roundtable discussion at the White House in 2024, in which Minnesota, or MnDOT, was invited to talk about what we're doing in the way of low-carbon concrete and other construction materials. And Robert's a great guy. I think we are so fortunate now to have him in Minnesota and here at the U of M. So please join me in welcoming Robert Hampshire.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Daubenberger. Thank you, Kyle Shelton, and the CTS team and staff for inviting me here today. It really is a genuine honor to be here in this room. You know, it kind of feels like a little bit of like I have a home court advantage a little bit given that I just joined the university just a little bit. I think today is 1 month. And I'm just really grateful to be here. You know, I spent the last 4 years leading research and technology at the U.S. Department of Transportation, which really was an honor of a lifetime of public service, and the colleagues, career staff, and community partners that I was able to interact with. And I just want to share a few stories about how researchers, technology can and have make a difference to this nation, to safety, and to communities. You know, today I want to again share a few of those stories upon reflection, now that I've kind of been in civilian life for about 10 months. You know, and really the core of the experience I want to share is that we, as researchers within the transportation system, really need to increase our social capital. That's our networks, the trust between our stakeholders, and our shared values that we have, not just within this community, but with partners that we work with. We certainly need to be much more embedded into the transportation system and the adjacent ecosystems to really, truly have the impact that we desire. And that, for me and many, starts with safety. You know, I joined USDOT at the first day of the Biden-Harris administration in 2021. I think that year, over 42,000 people were killed in vehicle crashes. Each of those deaths, you know, are someone's mom, daughter, father. You know, for me, it was personal. It was my cousin. It was the same age as I am, Nikki, Hampshire, who was killed in a car crash coming back from class at night, a continuing education class. I saw just yesterday a report of a crash in the Star Tribune. Here today, someone named Kiki Gleason was killed in a fiery car crash just outside of St. Paul as a passenger in an impaired driving accident. Someone who had been convicted 9 times of impaired driving. And these stories, I put names to them. I used to not do that, but I put names to them because this is the mission I saw at the USDOT that really motivated and moved our secretary, our career public servants in this ecosystem to reduce and eliminate crashes. In fact, at USDOT, we launched the National Roadway Safety Strategy and adopted the Safe Systems approach to make sure that 0 really is the only acceptable number of deaths. We have our own colleague here who created and led the National Roadway Safety Strategy for this nation that has been adopted across almost every state across this country to get to 0 through the leadership of Robin Hutchinson. You know, so, you know, but it still seems that our society kind of has a toleration for roadway fatalities. You know, but thank goodness that that's not the case traditionally in aviation. Aviation has had a stellar record until recently on safety. And I think that's something you know, the fatal crashes that we saw in the Potomac or in Louisville recently are just glaring examples, but we have a lot to learn from aviation in regards to safety. So the first example I'm going to provide about how research and technology really impacts lives in the nation is around aviation. About 4 years ago, just before Christmas, I was in a room where we were going to cancel every single flight in the United States 2 days before Christmas. It was because of concerns of something called 5G C-band, which is a telecommunication technology that was feared to interfere with airplanes. Something called altimeters. And during that preceding 9 months, it turns out the department, the FAA, the White House, everyone in federal government were working so diligently to make sure that this inevitably wouldn't happen. But here we were sitting with very high-level meetings, and we were going to cancel every single flight in this country. I was on point to lead the technical response to this disaster. This, clash wasn't because of just a clash between industries. It was a clash between cultures. It was the aviation industry and the telecommunications industry spoke completely different languages. Trust, reciprocity did not exist. And so this is what I'm saying. I say social capital was missing. That's the shared norms, the networks, the relationships, the values were missing, but is a key enabler to progress. So the aviation community experts, they predicted that this 5G service would, interfere with the altimeters. The FAA standards for interference and safety are very high. So some might say that maybe the restrictions were too strict, but altimeters certainly, some of them were old and outdated. On the other hand, telecommunications industry said, oh, there's no problem here, nothing to see here, we want to transmit our signal. Well, they did just pay $80 billion to do so they certainly were incentivized to get started. But it turns out, under the Secretary's leadership, we were able to avoid grounding all these aircraft just before Christmas. And so how did we do it? Well, it turns out that developing trust, developing norms were the things that made the difference. We coordinated a series of meetings, high-stakes meetings between the industry, both industries, researchers, university partners were involved, others in government. It was an all-hands-on-deck issue. But one of the things that really mattered, I remember this vividly. The nice thing about working at transportation and aviation was that we had airplanes. And so we took the telecommunication researchers and technicians on an airplane flight. And on the flight, there were measurements taken about how this 5G service would interfere with airplane avionics. And they got to see firsthand. And so this is one lesson I learned during my time at US, is that research and technologists, it actually field sites and visits really can matter for helping build trust, so you can develop shared understanding, shared test plans, and validate the models. So it's not just an X's and O's thing, it really is about people and experiences. So it turns out this was incredibly time-consuming, but these experiences of the joint effort to understand each other, to come to some shared understanding about safety, and building that trust led us to divert this pending disaster. Now, that social capital that was developed during this process still is benefiting us, as this saga is not completely over. It's safe to fly, but there's ongoing issues, but those relationships built between those two industries actually now have benefited us in many other domains as well. Another example in that vein, let me just turn a little bit to a second example around something called vehicle to everything communication, or V2X. It turns out that last year, almost around this time, the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, adopted a final rule to make what's called the auto safety spectrum available for all to use. These rules would improve transportation safety by allowing vehicles to communicate with each other, communicate with pedestrians, but communicate with bicyclists. When fully implemented, the research shows that these rules could save thousands of lives per year. But it turns out this ruling was certainly far from certain. 4 years earlier, it was seen that this V2X technology was dead in the United States. And so when I joined the USDOT, the team, my team of researchers who worked on this were certainly demoralized, disappointed. You know, much of the air had really moved out of the room on connected vehicles and moved a little bit more, much more towards automated vehicles that were decoupled from this connectivity technology. You know, but I was certainly convinced, and I wanted to convince our fellow leaders, industry, those across the White House, and allies in Congress that advocating for this reinstatement of this V2X would save lives. And so we had a motto, I had a motto for our team, you know, we had to deploy now, not later. And what we did in partnership with industry, all the modes of transportation, is convene stakeholders over a series of, some of you all I think were there, thousands of people in each of these convenings to come together, to build and deepen the relationships to move this, not just technology, but promise for safety forward. Now, certainly, there were real concerns here. I mean, we know that privacy concerns were an issue, so there's advocates around privacy. Some thought this was the tail wagging the dog, meaning that is this a solution looking for a problem? The FCC and the telecom industry thought, well, this has passed its day. Is it really going to save lives? And of course, the way we got through this was building a stronger network. We didn't just make a better technical argument, which we did. Through these convenings, through our building our relationships, we built a better story. And so the individuals and stakeholders could all come to bear on the FCC to say, hey, we need this. And in fact, that piece of spectrum was enabled. We funded many cities and researchers across the country to deploy it. And I'm happy to say those deployments are continuing, not just in pilot mode, but actually in real-world deployments across this country. And again, that was from building a coalition of the willing, finding, in some ways, a third path. It's not like technology for its own sake, but how do you appeal to safety? How do you appeal to those shared values? And I call that building our social capital. And I'll kind of give you a couple other examples here. You say, well, you were in government, you had to, you could have, a $1 billion budget to do these kind of things. Like, as researchers, what can we do? Or as a community, what can we do to kind of build our social capital? How can we lead these coalitions, lead to change? And so I'll give you 2 examples of programs that we created that allowed space for researchers and community members to do this kind of work. And one of them was the Smart Grants program. Smart Grants was created in the infrastructure bill. It was a $100 million a year program where communities can lead on technology deployment. So communities define a transportation need and a set of technologies that might be part of the solution. And so my office led that program. I'm happy to say there's still over 100 smart grants around this country that are making transportation safer, more efficient. And I'm happy to say that one of those grants is here in the city of Minneapolis. We're the winner of a $15 million smart grant phase 2. Now this connects to the first panel, the first keynote speech around freight. So that smart grant, together with some Open Mobility Foundation, is around curb management. We made over 10 awards around curb management. That's particularly last mile delivery, how people park, but also freight. You heard already this morning. And so that's an opportunity for universities, research, the city, and the private sector to work together in a shared way. We saw of the over 100 smart grants, over half of them had university and UTC partners. So these kind of deployment grants are an opportunity for folks in this room. Smart grants is still going. There's others in this vein to partner with communities, with business, to see your research move into impact. Another program that we created was something called ARPA-I. This is the Advanced Research Project Agency for Infrastructure. You might have heard of DARPA in the Defense Department that created GPS and other stealth fighters. ARPA-I for infrastructure really is taking that same approach, a mission-driven approach to say, hey, we have some large-scale challenges, getting to zero fatalities, getting to net zero carbon emissions. How do we do that? We need new transformative approaches, and ARPA-I was created to fund that. In fact, ARPA-I is still operating and just had $1 million prize competition. So for researchers here, prize competitions are also a way to take this, what I call like a mission-oriented approach to your research. So ARPA-I had a $1 million challenge to solve real problems, and we saw that researchers and communities partnered together to go after and solve those problems. And so let me move to close just to say that, certainly my experience at USDOT and the great colleagues and opportunities that we had there have informed the work that I've done afterwards. But one of the things I saw was that many programs related to research and technology are fragmented. So we were funding research across 100 universities. What I see that the federal government is that the sum of the parts is not adding up to more than individual pieces. That fragmentation happens at the federal level, but can also happen, at the local levels as well. And this is one of the great challenges, and I think an opportunity for the new office that I've been able to lead, called Research Development here at the University of Minnesota, to take on some of those big research challenges, but really to help researchers go after the research grants, but not just the grants, to realize your vision of impact, which oftentimes takes large interdisciplinary community partnerships. And so I've had the honor working under Kim Kirkpatrick and the Vice President of Research here at the university to build on the legacy of success that they've had, but take that mission to the next level. And so I just want to leave you all with that and say, it really is those webs of connection, the social capital that you can build, us as a community, meaning are we in the conversations to make impact? Are we in the conversations with the community when it comes time to implement and move our discovery, from the lab to practice? And I look forward to continue to work with you all and help you guys do that, and we can all do that together. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Robert. That's going, right? Yeah.
Thank you, Kyle.
It's great to have you again, and thanks for that reflection on all of the time in the government and with the department. I'm excited to talk about that, and also just very delighted to have you as a colleague and go get all these big awards and bring them to the University of Minnesota and to the state. I wanted to start just thinking, and just as a FYI, we'll do the same process we did before. We'll open it up here to the floor at some point after I go through some ideas. So get your questions generated here for Robert. I'm really curious, having come from academia and coming, if I'm not mistaken, you had not worked in government before going to USDOT. So I'm really interested, you shared some of these lessons already, but what were some of your immediate reactions or expectations as you moved from academia into the department in the beginning? And what were some of those things that were a challenge to what you expected, or were a really positive departure from that? What were some of those initial reactions?
Okay, well, thank you. There's so many. I don't know where to start. But, before that, I've been a faculty member at Carnegie Mellon University and also University of Michigan before joining the administration. I think one of the big pieces was just the speed and the pace. I think from the very first day we joined in the beginning of COVID, it was we're right in the dark days of COVID, and there was a real impetus and mission and a pace that it was eye-opening. I think the speed of government, some people say is slow, but I'm telling you that was a big adjustment for me, and it was welcome, but it was I had a team of colleagues and a leader like Secretary Pete that was about outcomes and really making a difference, and that took a level of intensity that I hadn't fully appreciated before. I'll say that.
A slightly different pace than an academic semester. Okay. Yep.
Pace, yeah.
That was something that just jumped out to me from your comments as well that I'm curious if you can talk through a little bit more. And I really value the kind of relationship building and the social capital argument you're making and experienced. But I was particularly struck by this question of speed. And I mean, safety is the number one, maybe the best example of that, right? Like wanting to respond in the moment to the crises and the daily loss of lives that are happening. How can you talk a little bit more about how you use that relationship building, that idea of social capital in that, not just in the fast pace of government, but also in an incredibly complicated bureaucracy where there are so many offices. Like what did that actually look like in a day-to-day of trying to do something now while also recognizing that you're wanting to build that relationship over time?
Yeah, I guess I'm kind of two minds on this. I think the speed of the mission that you're going after, it's a lot of things are accelerating. Fatalities, you think about those that are happening every day. That's something that's in your face every day. Or we think about climate. That's something that's moving quickly. So if we're sitting, every moment that we're sitting in our labs, running a model, simulating something in Python is like another day that someone's dying. Is another day that things, and so that there's a pressure or a pace that I want to impress upon, well, you guys can work at your own pace, but I think there's a pace to really take on the challenges that we have. But with that being said, I'm of another mind and to realize that universities are a place that are outside of quarterly earnings, outside of annual report, outside of the political cycle of 2 to 4 years, meaning that places of discovery like this can really dig in and do foundational work. So both are needed, and I think both require different kinds of networks and relationships to be activated.
And I know you're a month into this work at the university, but I think that's one of the things I'd be curious to, work alongside with you on. But right now, as you're continuing to reflect on that, it's not all researchers here, but I am curious, messaging to researchers as we think about that. To your point, I have some other questions about basic research and moving technologies along, but this maybe goes back to my first question as well. What are the ways that you think academia could be aware, more self-aware, and also thinking about how we're evolving as researchers in a research community? What are the things that you would share with the researchers to think about doing that? What do they need to undertake? How do we start to think about that, and how can the university do that?
That's a great question, and I think I faced that as well within my time in government, is how to best communicate, and how do you communicate at the right level and at the right time. But I think this community, I'm looking at some of the faces here, some of your research results or impact are really important, but how do you communicate that at a level that's digestible? I think we need to understand what plane is the conversation happening. So I would say in transportation, you might want to make sure you look at ENO, their weekly newsletter, or you might want to look at something that NACDO is doing, and make sure you have a good point of departure as you're discussing things, because if you're just coming with a technical result or some particular data out of context and it's not in the flow of the conversation that's happening, then it could be lost. Even though I know a lot of folks are doing terrific work, but who are you talking to? Who's the audience? And really knowing that and then communicating the results through the proper channels to the right audience in the way they can receive it, I think is something that's an art, honestly, and I think it's is really important to be part of the conversation. Otherwise, you just have some result off to the side when you know it's really important, but you can't get it in front of the right people.
Yeah, thanks. That's also an unconscious plug for working with the CTS communications team. The next time we say, hey, we really want to see this report move into the right hands and be communicated about at a different level, we're super excited to do that with y'all. An offshoot of that question, I think, is also like, what, in practice, do you have examples of that sort of happening? I was just talking with some of our MnDOT colleagues, and I think Nissa's here. Nissa Tupper and her team are now leading something that's called like the integration unit, and forgive me if I'm getting the name wrong. But I really love this idea of like we're able to take a study or a new practice or something that's coming from not on the ground, but then to try to share it and to try to bring it into a conversation in a new way. And I see a lot of that pathway. I see that pathway as being really critical for research as well, and to not just stop even the best of communication tools is probably not enough, right? And I think you were touching on that with the technical data and storytelling piece. Do you have examples of times or ways?
There's some places that do this quite well. I know CTS, we have a lot of successes in this vein, but I'll give one from Johns Hopkins. There was a researcher there who we funded as part of one of our UTCs that had a study about how road widths impact safety. So making like local roads and whether or not the standards, the safety manual standards for road widths are ones, how that impacts safety. And so they had a result, certainly that, I think it was certainly narrower roads are more safe. But the way they got the message out, you say, oh, okay, I've seen studies like that, but I felt like it was having impact because they were paired with a health foundation or health initiative. Because this is like a Bloomberg health initiative. And so they kind of got the word out through an adjacent industry. So it was health industry kind of took this up. And I think at least there was a lot of buzz about it. So it was like communicating in the transportation community, but also those adjacent communities that also have a different kind of reach, I think could also be a strategy.
Yeah, using the interconnectedness it's not just an obstacle, it can also lead to lots of sharing more quickly, taking advantage of that speed. That's a great example, thank you. I'm also curious to jump back to the sort of more basic foundational research piece as you were talking about, right? We're also not suggesting that end. That's critical because there's a whole lot of technologies that are not ready for prime time. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about your experience with that and sort of walking through, I mean, I'm sure you interacted not just with academic partners and agency partners, but also industry as well. Like when we think about an early stage technology saying we think this will solve this problem, we haven't started to test it at scale, for example, right. Or it's moving up my new favorite acronym that I have definitely learned at CTS, the technology readiness level. Okay. TRL, it took me a really long time to not assume that was an MTV show. What does that, what lessons have you learned there of like, what are the pieces that we can continue to prioritize? How do we still prioritize that foundational research while also still sort of adding this urgency, adding elements of the like iterate, evolve, okay. What's that look like?
Well, there's one example that kind of pops to mind, and it has actually to do with national security. And a lot of transportation, well, there's some aspects of the transportation system that are related to national security as well. And one of them is the GPS system. So the Department of Transportation is in charge of all non-military aspects of GPS. And it turns out globally, we've seen with the war in Ukraine and other, that there's a lot of, those systems are at threat. And there needs to be backups for GPS. And so one of the basic research ideas started from like a national security, like an imperative, and that is magnetic maps. So at the Ohio State University and at UT Austin, we funded work to basically make a magnetic map of the United States. So it turns out that every location on the planet has a unique magnetic signature. And there were colleagues that were even here, there's a Centers of Excellence, Jinping, in the electrical engineering department here at magnetics. So there's very fundamental physics, quantum mechanics, quantum sensing related to navigation and mapping. And that work, while fundamental, is stemming from a national security, a very clear national security challenge. And so basic research that's motivated by an imperative. I saw that be very exciting, yes, and impactful, hopefully.
And what is that process? Because I think this is not just the government and the academia side of it, it's also industry is getting involved at every level of that. Like, is there a version of the, I think most of the message I heard from you in the talk was about agency to academics. And I'm curious, like, where industry fits into that, and how are there different ways to think about, in that example you just gave, like, how as researchers should we be thinking about our relationship to industry, and how do you also respond to the then profit motive of industry? As you were talking about, one of the benefits of the university is that is not necessarily always foregrounded, but it also is a part of the reality of scaling up a technology. Where does industry fit into all of these examples from you?
Yeah, I'll give two, and one is, for example, we ran a program called SBIR, Small Business Innovation Research Program. And we know that's taking research that then has commercial potential. And certainly the SBIRs that we funded at USDOT had university researchers who, one, maybe spun out their own company, or two, are partnering with, have industry partners. And so SBIR is very much a great way to do that, partnering with industry. Those programs still exist. I think they're even being scaled up, those kind of projects. I wouldn't claim that I'm the expert on all things business collaboration, but I think more and more what we're seeing around, particularly on the federal funding side, are more eligibility for industry to receive funds for research and technology development. And I know we have teams at this university and others that are are working close and will work closer with industry to go after some of those technology development grants that are federal. So I encourage everyone to continue to work with your industry partners. If you're here at the university, come work with us and let us provide some support for you and for your industry partnerships.
Yeah, and that's something I've talked with both you and Kim, and I know we're not reinventing the wheel on, but we're starting to think about more of, a lot of our orientation has been working with our agency partners to think about what are the questions and needs that you have, and we want to expand that to also include, hey, industry partners, what are some of the questions
Absolutely.
You're asking? Are there things that the university can bring to bear on that as well and collaborate in
Yeah,
that regard
and
as well?
I'd be remiss if I'm looking around this room and just all the great partners in the commercial sector and industry that are here at this very moment. And this is an example of that kind of social capital and relationship that CTS and Kyle under your leadership have built. And that's evidenced by this room. So I would say keep going and let's keep doing what we're doing and continue to work together.
Thanks, all right. This is your question warning. I'm going to ask one or two more, and then I'm going to come to you all / microphone walkers. This is your question warning as well. Robert, I talked a little bit about this as well, right? You've been in the academic world, you've been at the federal level now. One of the things I opened with, and much of this audience is also local agency representation or regional agency or state representation. Are there differences in how you think about the ways that those government levels can collaborate and engage in some of the processes you're talking about? Or like, how do you think about the differences between the federal level where you're able to say, here's the $2 billion program, give us some responses, as opposed to the state or the region or a local level?
Well, okay, that's...
Just answer that for everybody if you don't mind.
Okay. Certainly there's... I only hesitate to say I've never really... I'm learning a lot about federalism, so I'm trying to understand the local level and how it all works vis-a-vis federal government. So certainly that's the important partnership, and I think that partnership is still there. From what I saw, and I go back to our public career officials in government that I had the time to work with and the utmost respect for. They're dedicated to the missions of their agencies, and I know, be it safety and transportation, be it across the government, those, and so I would encourage us to continue to work, very closely, because those missions haven't changed and won't change. I don't know of any specific. What did you have in mind?
I guess what I'm wondering
what did you have in
is
mind? I'm
like
sorry.
the same type of relationship building and the same type of, priority setting, question setting. Like, do you think that operates at the same
I see.
speed and in the same form at different levels of government, or is there something different for this audience, state, regionally, and locally, that they should be thinking about differently?
I think engagement and whatever stakeholder, community engagement, being involved, it continues to be the most important way, especially upstream, be it being on an advisory committees, being road mapping exercises, talking to the community to understand what the needs are at the various levels, still is the case. The university has a strategic plan. Local government under the leadership have plans. The federal government have plans they're making. I would say stay engaged, stay involved, and be visible. Particularly as a research community, to be involved in those processes are important.
Great, thanks. My last question before I open it up would be, there's a lot to work on, right? How do you think about prioritizing? How did you think about prioritizing? And then I think this is maybe a little bit of a mesh of my question around like pulling in practice from industry and having academia be a little bit more nimble, and also agencies be a little bit more nimble. I think academics and agencies don't necessarily have the best reputation for speed.
Right.
But like, what are the ways that we can identify those priorities and then really start to
like I said, I would stay engaged in the strategic planning processes. I think what I saw in federal government is, there's leadership from the top, and there's strategic plans and priorities made, and people are working towards those priorities. And I think, being aligning oneself where you see appropriate, or pushing back even on those priorities, but there are conversations, documents, a lot of work to figure out at various levels of government what the priorities are. And so I would say know those and understand, your relationship to those priorities.
And a lot of that comes into storytelling as well,
Yep.
right? Because you're able to say, this is what this document says, here are the priorities we have, here's where this data or here's where this research can help us push on that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I would say one piece that I did learn, and for the community researchers, I didn't really fully appreciate this before when I was a professor going into government. A lot of the most impactful research is actually related to a regulatory action. So the research you're doing, is there like a docket, like a regulatory action that's attached? Because those regulatory actions have industry involved, they have lawyers, there's a lot of energy, and they make a difference, those regulatory actions. So I didn't fully appreciate that. The regulatory kind of research can be really important.
Yeah, I'm going to have a thought on that, but raise your hands if you have questions as I finish my thoughts so that the microphones can get to you. I'll buy you some time. I think that last point is something that I have really been struck by as well of, again, I'm going to go back to this idea of integrating, of like bringing the research to a specific conversation and not just saying, hey, this is out here, wouldn't you like to use it, but actually sort of volunteering yourself to say, I have this and I want to give it to you in this discussion.
Because those regulatory actions, there's a conversation around it. Yeah.
And I forget which of our civil engineering professors I was talking to, and I got very jealous because we were talking about his PhD. I do remember who it was. And they mentioned that their PhD immediately went into building code, like was actually brought into a regulatory code. And I thought, so my dissertation definitely had the same level of applicability and impact, for sure. So, wonderful. Go to audience. Yeah.
Thank you, Robert, for your comments today. We have a lot of students in the audience today, and I'm just curious. So, yes, I know your portfolio is broader than transportation here at the university, but what would you say to the students to encourage them, whether it's in the public sector, private sector, or the academic sector, on why they should stay engaged and involved in the transportation industry once they graduate?
Oh, wow. Thank you for the question. I just got to say how really honored I am to be here, to be able to answer a question like that, for upcoming students. I like to think it wasn't so long ago that I was the student in the audience, and to hear from someone. So I really am humbled at the moment to really be able to answer a question like that. I would say, can work on the things that you're excited about and really sparks joy for you and not what someone else thinks you should be working on. But also I've benefited from mentors and those faculty mentors and others that really make a tremendous difference. So, find the things that you really enjoy. Okay, you want to find things that maybe other people value as well, I think, but also surround yourself with like-minded people and mentors is what, I don't know if I'm answering the question, but that's what the answer that I feel compelled to give right at this moment.
So I have I hope this isn't too esoteric a question, but do you feel like there's a disconnect between like impactful research and what is valued in academia? So just for example, like if we have a junior faculty member going up for tenure, we look at how much money they brought in and how many publications they have. And that might not be the research that actually has the biggest practical impact. That's the same research that you can quickly publish on. So I'm just wondering if you see a disconnect there and how you might address it.
I think that's a huge question that I'm not sure if in the position to give a authoritative answer on that. I mean, I think as academia, the processes of promotion and there's a lot of effort and time and and thought that does go into it. So I don't have an answer for that. I'm sorry. That's a great question. Yeah, that's all right.
I mean, it does seem to me,
Kyle, please,
I'm
I
not
need
going to
a-
answer
I
it.
need
I
a
was just going to
lifeline,
ask,
Kyle,
are there any
please.
deans in the room?
Please, I'm not a dean.
See, we can't get in that much trouble. There aren't even
I don't
any
wanna-
deans here. No, but I think
Sorry,
the question about building relationships and building,
Yeah.
and I mean, to me, it ties into community engagement and it ties into the ways that we are getting questions from our stakeholders and helping to answer them. And I mean, it may not result in a change to our tenure process, and I agree with you. There's lots of good thought that goes into that, but I think in some of the ways that we've talked about it, it's also like this nimbleness of how do you enable and reward people or find other paths to reward if it's not through the tenure process to say this matters and to say investing in the project that maybe isn't the thing you're going to publish on but leads to this really impactful outcome for a community is definitely, I would put a challenge to ourselves at the university to say we should grapple with that because it is rewarding.
Let me not completely punt on it. I think I've certainly seen work that some people think there's impact over here and there's scholarship over here. I don't think it's not like a binary, right, necessarily. So I think impactful work certainly has a depth of scholarship oftentimes. So it may not always be, it could be a false dichotomy.
And I think it's something for us to think about how Rio and Rio centers can help incentivize and reward that if it's not within the tenure structure. So I'm giving us all an assignment. The three of us can figure it out. Please join me one more time in thanking Robert, and then we'll move on.